The acrid smell of smoke filled Madeleine Parker's lungs as she pounded her fists against the wooden walls of the smokehouse, each strike weakening as the minutes passed and hope faded with the setting sun of the Texas frontier. Dust from the parched earth of Miller's Creek swirled in the hot July winds of 1871. The small settlement, not much more than a general store, saloon, and scattering of homesteads, lay quiet in the midday heat. Madeleine had only arrived 2 weeks prior, a 22-year-old schoolteacher from Boston with dreams of bringing education to the Western Territories. She'd come at the invitation of Theodore Harrington, the town's founder and self-appointed mayor, who had advertised for a teacher in Eastern newspapers. Madeleine's hands were raw from scraping at the wood. She'd been locked inside the smokehouse for nearly 6 hours now, abandoned by Harrington after she had refused his advances. What had begun as a welcome dinner at his home had quickly turned sinister when he'd cornered her in his study, his breath thick with whiskey. "You'll learn to appreciate my generosity, Miss Parker," he had snarled when she'd slapped him. "This town needs a teacher who understands her place." 2 of his ranch hands had dragged her to the old smokehouse behind the slaughterhouse, laughing as they'd pushed her inside. "She'll be well smoked by morning," one had joked, securing the heavy iron latch. The smokehouse was small, barely 6 feet square, with aging wooden planks that fit so tightly she could scarcely see daylight between them. A metal hook hung from the ceiling, and old bloodstains marked the dirt floor. The scent of years of smoking meat permeated the space, but it was the newer fire, started in the external fire pit and channeled into the smokehouse through a crude stone chimney, that was slowly suffocating her. Madeleine sank to her knees, her once pristine blue dress filthy and torn. She had tried everything, kicking at the door, searching for loose boards, even attempting to climb up and out through the smoke vent, but it was too small and too high. The smoke was getting thicker. Harrington clearly meant for her to die here, another mysterious disappearance in a territory where law existed mainly in theory. "Help," she called again, her voice hoarse. "Someone, please help me." Miles Irwin pulled his hat lower against the setting sun as he guided his horse along the creek bed. At 26, he'd spent nearly half his life working cattle, most recently as a trail boss for the Bartlett Ranch 10 miles outside Miller's Creek. He was returning from delivering a small herd to Fort Worth, his saddlebags heavy with payment and supplies. Miles wasn't planning to stop in Miller's Creek. The place had a reputation, and not a good one. Harrington ran it like a personal kingdom, and the last time Miles had passed through, he'd narrowly avoided a brawl with some of Harrington's men. But his horse, Rusty, had picked up a stone, and Miles needed to check the animal's hoof before continuing to the ranch. He dismounted near the creek, leading Rusty to water before lifting the horse's foreleg to examine the hoof. As he worked, a sound carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. A woman's cry. Miles straightened, listening. The sound came again, weaker this time. He secured Rusty's reins to a scrub oak and moved cautiously toward the source, his hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. The slaughterhouse sat at the edge of town, and behind it, Miles spotted thin wisps of smoke rising from the old smokehouse. As he approached, he heard the sound again, a desperate, muffled plea for help. "Hello, is someone in there?" he called, approaching the structure. Inside, Madeleine's heart leaped at the sound of a human voice. "Help, I'm locked in," she cried, her voice breaking. "Please, the smoke, I can't breathe." Miles rushed to the door, finding it secured with a heavy iron latch and padlock. "Stand back from the door," he called, assessing the structure. The smokehouse was old, the boards weathered. Rather than waste time trying to break the lock, he moved to the back wall where the wood looked most deteriorated. Using the butt of his revolver, Miles began smashing at the boards. The dry, aged wood splintered under his assault. After several powerful strikes, a board cracked and gave way. He holstered his weapon and used his bare hands to tear at the opening, ignoring the splinters that dug into his palms. "Hold on," he called, working faster as he heard coughing from inside. The smoke was thicker now, pouring from the open fire pit. Miles realized with horror that whoever had done this had intended not just to imprison but to kill. Finally, the opening was large enough. Through the smoke, he could make out a slight figure huddled against the far wall. "Come toward my voice," he urged. "Follow my voice." Madeleine crawled toward the sound, disoriented from the smoke. A strong pair of hands reached through the opening, finding her arms and pulling her firmly toward the fresh air. As Miles dragged her through the broken boards, Madeleine gasped in the clean air, her lungs burning. He didn't stop, carrying her several yards away from the smokehouse before setting her down gently on the grass. "Breathe slow," he instructed, supporting her as she coughed violently. "That's it, just breathe." When her coughing subsided, Madeleine looked up at her rescuer. Through watering eyes, she saw a man with concern etched across his sun-weathered face, dark hair visible beneath his dusty cowboy hat. "Thank you," she managed, her voice raw. "He would have left me to die." Miles frowned. "Who did this to you, Harrington?" "Theodore Harrington." The name tasted bitter on her tongue. Her explanation was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. "That'll be his men," Miles said grimly, helping her to her feet. "Can you run?" Madeleine nodded, though her legs felt weak beneath her. Miles kept his arm around her waist as they hurried back to where he'd left Rusty. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, spurring the horse into motion just as two riders appeared at the edge of the slaughterhouse property. "Stop right there." One of them shouted, but Miles urged Rusty into a gallop, heading away from town and toward the safety of the open country. They rode hard for nearly an hour, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. Madeleine clung to the saddle horn, her body aching but her mind clear with the knowledge that she'd escaped certain death. Miles guided them off the main trail, following a smaller path that wound through a stand of cottonwoods along the creek. As dusk deepened into night, Miles finally slowed Rusty to a walk. "There's an old line shack about a mile ahead," he said, his voice close to her ear. "We can rest there tonight. You'll be safe." Madeleine nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline that had carried her through their escape was fading, leaving her trembling with fatigue and delayed shock. The line shack was simple, a one-room structure with a small fireplace, rough wooden table, and narrow cot. Miles helped Madeleine dismount, steadying her as her legs threatened to give way. "Sit," he said gently, guiding her to the cot. "I'll get a fire going." As Miles busied himself with kindling, Madeleine finally had a chance to properly look at her rescuer. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. His hands were calloused but gentle, and beneath the grime of the trail, she could see he was handsome in a rugged way. "I'm Madeleine Parker," she said, her voice still rough from the smoke. I was the new schoolteacher in Miller's Creek." Miles glanced up from the fireplace, the small flame illuminating his face. "Miles Irwin, I work for the Bartlett Ranch." He studied her for a moment. "Harrington brought you out here to teach," Madeleine nodded, then coughed painfully. Miles abandoned the fire to pour water from his canteen into a tin cup, offering it to her. "Sip it slow," he advised. "Your throat's probably raw from the smoke." She took the cup gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "I arrived 2 weeks ago from Boston." Harrington had advertised for a teacher. Everything seemed fine at first, but tonight, she shuddered. "He expected certain accommodations in exchange for my position." Miles' expression darkened. "And when you refused, he decided to make you disappear." "Yes." Madeleine looked down at her ruined dress, smudged with soot and torn at the hem. "What kind of place is this? Is there no law?" "The nearest marshal is in Fort Worth, 2 days' ride," Miles explained, returning to build up the fire. "Out here, men like Harrington make their own law. But they don't always get away with it." He straightened, dusting his hands on his jeans. "The Bartletts are good people. Their ranch is a day's ride from here. Mrs. Bartlett will help you." Madeleine felt a wave of gratitude, followed quickly by uncertainty. "And Harrington, his men?" "They won't find us tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." Miles rummaged in his saddlebags, producing jerky and hardtack. "It's not much, but you should eat something." They shared the simple meal in comfortable silence. As the fire crackled and night sounds filtered through the thin walls of the shack, Madeleine felt herself relaxing slightly for the first time since her ordeal began. "You should take the cot," Miles said, unrolling his bedroll on the floor. "Get some rest. We'll leave at first light." Madeleine wanted to protest he'd already done so much, but exhaustion was overtaking her. She lay down, using her arm as a pillow. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," she murmured. "I owe you my life." Miles looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "No thanks needed, Miss Parker. Get some sleep now." Madeleine closed her eyes, expecting sleep to claim her immediately. Instead, her mind replayed the terrifying hours in the smokehouse, the helplessness, the certainty that she would die there. She tried to stifle a sob, but it escaped despite her efforts. "Miss Parker," Miles' voice came softly through the darkness. "Are you all right?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I keep seeing it, feeling it, the smoke, the walls closing in." Miles was silent for a moment. Then she heard him move, felt his presence as he sat on the edge of the cot. "It's over now," he said gently. "You're safe." His simple words broke something in her, and Madeleine found herself crying in earnest, the tension and fear of the day flowing out of her. Miles hesitated, then awkwardly patted her shoulder. "I thought I was going to die," she admitted between sobs. "No one knew where I was, no one would have come looking." "But someone did come," Miles reminded her. "Sometimes that's all it takes, one person hearing when you call for help." His words, spoken without sentimentality but with genuine kindness, steadied her. Madeleine wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I'm not usually like this," she said. "In Boston, I was considered quite capable." Miles smiled slightly. "I reckon you still are. Not many could survive what you did today." The simple vote of confidence warmed her more than the fire. Eventually, exhaustion won out and Madeleine drifted into sleep, aware of Miles returning to his bedroll, a reassuring presence in the darkness. Morning came with pale light filtering through the shack's single window. Madeleine woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day rushed back. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Miles was already awake, crouched by the fireplace where a small fire was heating a pot of coffee. He looked up as she stirred. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted. "But alive, thanks to you." He nodded, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. "We should get moving soon. Harrington's men will be searching." As Madeleine sipped the strong, bitter coffee, Miles explained his plan. They would ride to the Bartlett ranch, where she could find sanctuary while they sent word to the marshal in Fort Worth about Harrington's actions. "The Bartletts have influence," Miles assured her. "They've been wanting to check Harrington's power for some time. This might be the chance." "And if the marshal does nothing?" Madeleine asked. Miles' expression hardened. "Then we find another way. What Harrington did to you wasn't just wrong, it was murder in intent, if not deed. That doesn't go unanswered out here, law or no law." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, but Madeleine didn't press. Instead, she asked, "May I wash up before we go?" Miles nodded toward a basin of water he'd already prepared. "I'll check on Rusty," he said, stepping outside to give her privacy. Madeleine did her best to clean up, using her handkerchief to wipe the soot from her face and arms. Her dress was beyond salvation, but she straightened it as best she could and rebraided her hair, which had come loose during her ordeal. When she emerged from the shack, Miles was already saddling Rusty. The morning was clear and cool, promising heat later but pleasant for now. Madeleine took a deep breath, appreciating the fresh air after the suffocating smoke of the day before. "Ready?" Miles asked, offering his hand to help her mount. She nodded, placing her foot in his interlaced fingers and letting him boost her onto Rusty's back. Miles swung up behind her and they set off, following a path that paralleled the creek but stayed under the cover of trees. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour. Madeleine was acutely aware of Miles behind her, his chest occasionally brushing her back as Rusty navigated uneven terrain. There was something reassuring in his presence, a steadiness she hadn't encountered often in men, certainly not in Boston's drawing rooms. "May I ask how you came to be a cowboy, Mr. Irwin?" she ventured as they paused to let Rusty drink from the creek. Miles dismounted, helping her down. Family tradition, I suppose. My father ran cattle in Missouri. I started riding with him when I was 12. He shrugged. After the war, there wasn't much left of our place. I headed west, found work with trail drives. You fought in the war? Madeleine asked, surprised. He would have been very young, last year of it. Confederate side, though I didn't have strong feelings about the cause. Just seemed the thing to do when you're from Missouri. He looked at her appraisingly. That a problem for you being from Boston? Madeleine shook her head. The war's over, and you saved my life. I'd say that settles any old quarrels between North and South. Miles smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. Fair enough. He helped her remount, and they continued their journey. As the day progressed, the terrain changed, becoming more rugged. Miles explained they were taking a longer route to avoid the main trails where Harrington's men might be searching. Tell me about the Bartletts, Madeleine said as they rode. What kind of people are they? Good people. Honest. Thomas Bartlett came out here 15 years ago with nothing but a dream and a few head of cattle. Built one of the biggest spreads in the county. His wife, Sarah, is from back East Philadelphia, I think. They have 3 children, all in school now. A school? Madeleine perked up. Near their ranch, Miles nodded. They built it 3 years ago, hired a teacher from St. Louis, but she married a local rancher last spring and gave up teaching. They've been making do with Sarah teaching the local children when she can, but they're looking for someone permanent. Hope fluttered in Madeleine's chest. Do you think they might consider you for the position? Miles finished her thought. I'd say your chances are good, especially once they hear what happened in Miller's Creek. They stopped at midday to rest in the shade of a large oak. Miles shared the last of his provisions: jerky, dried apples, and a bit of cornbread. As they ate, he told Madeleine about life on the Bartlett ranch, painting a picture of a community far different from the harsh welcome she'd received in Miller's Creek. Why does someone like Harrington have so much power? Madeleine asked. If there are good people like the Bartletts nearby, how does he get away with his cruelty? Miles considered her question. Territory's big, people tend to mind their own business unless trouble comes knocking directly. And Harrington's smart, keeps most of his worst behavior confined to Miller's Creek, where he controls everything. Until now, Madeleine said quietly. Until now, Miles agreed, his eyes meeting hers. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to name. They continued their journey as the afternoon wore on. Madeleine found herself growing increasingly comfortable with Miles' proximity, occasionally asking questions about landmarks they passed or plants she didn't recognize. His answers were straightforward but patient, never condescending despite her obvious Eastern ignorance of Western ways. It was late afternoon when they crested a rise and Miles pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. Bartlett Ranch, he said. We'll be there before sundown. Madeleine felt a curious mix of relief and regret. Relief at the prospect of safety and civilized comforts, but regret that her time alone with Miles was coming to an end. As they approached the ranch, a rider came out to meet them, a young man on a pinto pony who hailed Miles with familiar enthusiasm. Mr. Irwin, didn't expect you back so soon. The young man's curious gaze shifted to Madeleine. Trouble in Miller's Creek, Jimmy, Miles said. This is Miss Parker. She needs to speak with Mrs. Bartlett right away. Jimmy nodded, turning his horse to lead them toward the main house, a substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. As they rode into the yard, a woman appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Miles, we weren't expecting you until next week. Her gaze, like Jimmy's, moved questioningly to Madeleine. Miles dismounted, then helped Madeleine down. Mrs. Bartlett, this is Miss Madeleine Parker. She's had some trouble with Harrington over in Miller's Creek. I was hoping you might help her. Sarah Bartlett's expression darkened at the mention of Harrington, but she quickly smoothed it into a welcoming smile. Of course. Come inside, Miss Parker. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. The next hours passed in a blur for Madeleine. Sarah Bartlett proved to be everything Miles had described: kind, efficient, and quietly furious when Madeleine recounted her ordeal in the smokehouse. She provided Madeleine with clean clothes, a hot bath, and a private room in which to rest. "You'll stay with us as long as you need," Sarah insisted. "And if you're interested, we're in desperate need of a teacher for our school. Miles mentioned you were hired to teach in Miller's Creek." Madeleine nodded, hardly daring to hope. "I came from Boston specifically for the position. I have references, though they're in my trunk, which is still at the boarding house in Miller's Creek." "We'll get your belongings," Sarah assured her. "My husband is riding to Fort Worth tomorrow to speak with Marshal Wilson about Harrington. This time, something will be done." That evening, Madeleine joined the Bartlett family for dinner in their spacious dining room. Thomas Bartlett, a robust man with kind eyes, welcomed her warmly and assured her of his support. Their 3 children ages 10, 8, and 6 regarded her with frank curiosity but impeccable manners. Miles joined them, freshly bathed and wearing clean clothes, looking remarkably different from the trail-worn cowboy who had rescued her. His dark hair, damp from washing, curled slightly at his collar, and without the layer of trail dust, his features were even more handsome. Throughout dinner, Madeleine found her gaze repeatedly drawn to him. Each time their eyes met, something warm unfurled in her chest. It was more than gratitude, she realized. In the span of just over a day, Miles Irwin had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. After the meal, while the Bartletts retired to the parlor with their children, Miles invited Madeleine to join him on the porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "How are you feeling?" Miles asked as they settled into chairs overlooking the ranch yard. "Better. Mrs. Bartlett has been very kind." Madeleine smoothed the borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton that fit reasonably well despite being slightly loose in the waist. "She's offered me the teaching position pending my references." "I thought she might," Miles smiled. "You'll be good for this community." "If I stay," Madeleine said, watching his expression carefully, "I could still return east." Miles was silent for a moment. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know any more." Madeleine looked out at the darkening landscape, so different from Boston's crowded streets. "I came west for adventure, for purpose. I thought I'd find it in Miller's Creek." "And instead you found Harrington," Miles said grimly. "I also found you," Madeleine said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Miles turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Miss Parker, Madeleine, please," she interrupted. "I think after everything we can use first names, don't you?" He nodded slowly. Madeleine, the way he said her name, like he was tasting it, sent a pleasant shiver through her. "You don't owe me anything for what happened yesterday." "I know that," she said. "My gratitude and my interest are separate things." Miles' eyebrows rose slightly. "Interest." Madeleine felt heat rise to her cheeks but pressed on. "You're different from any man I've known. Direct, honest. You risked your life for a stranger." She met his gaze steadily. "I'd like to know you better if you're amenable." For a moment, Miles said nothing, and Madeleine feared she'd overstepped. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "I'm amenable," he said, the formal word sounding endearingly awkward in his frontier drawl. "Very amenable." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories of their lives before this moment. Miles told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his mother to influenza when he was 14, about riding with his father's cattle and learning the ways of the trail. Madeleine spoke of Boston, of teaching in a girls' school there, of her parents' reluctant blessing when she'd announced her intention to accept a position in the territories. "They thought I was mad," she admitted. "Perhaps they were right. Not mad," Miles corrected. "Brave. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind." "Like you did after the war," he nodded. "Different circumstances, but yes, sometimes you have to leave to find where you belong." "And have you?" Madeleine asked. "Found where you belong?" Miles looked at her for a long moment. "I'm starting to think so." The following week brought significant changes. Thomas Bartlett returned from Fort Worth with Marshal Wilson, who took Madeleine's statement about Harrington's actions. The marshal, a no-nonsense man with a reputation for fairness, assured her that Harrington would face consequences. "Attempted murder's a hanging offense," he told her grimly, "even out here." Two of the Bartlett ranch hands accompanied Jimmy to Miller's Creek to retrieve Madeleine's trunk and belongings. They returned not only with her things but with news that Harrington had fled, apparently tipped off about the marshal's interest in his activities. "He won't get far," Marshal Wilson promised. "I've sent telegrams to every law office within 200 miles. With Harrington gone, Miller's Creek began a slow transformation. Several families who had suffered under his rule stepped forward with their own stories of intimidation and violence. The marshal established a temporary office in the settlement, promising regular visits until a permanent lawman could be appointed. Madeleine began teaching at the Bartlett School, a simple one-room building that served children from the ranch and surrounding homesteads. She found purpose in the work, delighting in her students' eager minds and straightforward questions, and through it all, there was Miles. He continued his work as trail boss for the Bartletts, but he found reasons to visit the schoolhouse when his duties allowed. Sometimes he brought interesting rocks or plants for the children to examine. Other times, he simply sat at the back of the room, watching Madeleine teach with an expression that made her heart quicken. Their courtship progressed with the same directness that characterized Miles himself. There were rides across the ranch lands, picnics by the creek, and evenings on the Bartlett's porch talking until the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky. 2 months after her rescue, Miles took Madeleine to a special place he'd discovered, a small clearing overlooking a bend in the creek, where wildflowers grew in surprising abundance, despite the late summer heat. "It's beautiful," Madeleine said, spreading the picnic blanket in the shade of a cottonwood. Miles helped her arrange the simple meal they'd brought: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jug of sweet tea. As they ate, he seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Is something wrong?" Madeleine finally asked. Miles set aside his plate, turning to face her fully. "Nothing's wrong," he said, "just thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't heard you calling that day." Madeleine shuddered slightly. "I try not to dwell on that, I know." Miles took her hand. "But I can't help thinking it was more than chance that brought me to that creek at that exact moment." "Providence," Madeleine suggested. Her own faith had been tested by her ordeal but ultimately strengthened by her survival. "Maybe." Miles squeezed her hand. "Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it, for you," Madeleine smiled. "As am I for you." Miles drew a deep breath. "Madeleine, I've never been good with fancy words, but these past months, getting to know you, it's been the best time of my life." Her heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. "Mine too," she said softly. "I don't have much to offer," Miles continued. "No fine house or family fortune, just my hands, my heart, and a promise to spend every day trying to make you happy." He reached into his pocket, producing a small ring, a simple silver band with a modest pearl. "Would that be enough? Would I be enough?" Tears sprang to Madeleine's eyes. "Oh, Miles, you're more than enough. You're everything." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss gentle but filled with promise. When they finally parted, Madeleine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never expected to find love in the West," she murmured. "Especially not after how things began." Miles stroked her hair. "Sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the best endings." They were married a month later in the Bartlett ranch house, with Sarah serving as Madeleine's matron of honor and Thomas standing up for Miles. The entire community gathered to celebrate, including many from Miller's Creek, who had found new hope in Harrington's absence. News came on their wedding day that Harrington had been captured in New Mexico territory and would be returned to Texas to face justice for his crimes. It felt like the closing of a chapter, allowing their new life together to begin untainted by old fears. That night, in the small cabin the Bartletts had given them as a wedding gift, Miles held Madeleine close as they contemplated their future. "I was thinking," he said, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, "about building a proper house next spring, something with enough rooms for a family." Madeleine smiled in the darkness. "A family sounds wonderful, and you'll keep teaching, at least until the children come." "Yes," she said. "Though I may need help getting to and from the schoolhouse once winter arrives." Miles pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll take you myself every morning and bring you home every afternoon. My gallant cowboy, Madeleine teased gently, always rescuing me. That day at the smokehouse, Miles said, his voice growing serious, when I heard your voice calling for help, something changed in me. Like I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Madeleine raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them. I know exactly what you mean, she whispered. I called out hoping someone would save my life. I never imagined someone would give me a whole new one instead. Miles pulled her down for another kiss, sealing their promise of a future neither could have imagined just months before, a future born from desperate moments and brave choices, from smoke and fear transformed into clarity and love. 5 years later, Madeleine stood on the porch of their home, watching as Miles taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to sit on his first pony. Their infant daughter, Sarah, slept in her cradle nearby, her tiny face peaceful in the afternoon light. The house Miles had built stood on a gentle rise overlooking the creek, where they'd had their picnic the day he proposed. It was a fine home with 4 bedrooms, a study where Madeleine still tutored children too far from the school to attend regularly, and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Miles glanced up, catching her eye, and smiled that same smile that had first captured her heart. Thomas waved excitedly, proud of his accomplishment, and Madeleine waved back, her heart full. From smoke and terror had come this: a family, a home, a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Madeleine still marveled at how close she'd come to losing everything before she'd even found it. But then Miles would take her hand, his touch a constant reminder that she was safe, that she was loved, that the nightmare of the smokehouse was nothing more than a distant memory, a beginning, terrible as it was, that had led her exactly where she belonged.